My name is Andrea Peterson, and I will be your host tonight. I am the North Dakota Envirothon Coordinator. This is my first year, and I've had a blast getting to know the teams, our committees, and our sponsors. I can't wait for an in-person competition next year. This year definitely looked different. However, I can still tell the teams worked hard and learned a lot in the natural resources fields of aquatics, soils, wildlife, prairie, and forestry. Tonight, the top 3 teams will present their current issue oral presentations live in front of our team of judges. But first, I want to thank all of our sponsors for their support this year. Without their support, this program could not happen. The North Dakota Environmental Quality Department, the North Dakota Game and Fish Department, the North Dakota Water Commission, the North Dakota Forest Service, the North Dakota Association of Soil Conservation Districts, the North Dakota Natural Resources Trust, the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, the USDA Forest Service, and the National Conservation Foundation Envirothon. I also want to thank all of our preliminary round oral presentation judges and our North Dakota Envirothon Committee. Thank you for your help this year, especially since it was my first year learning the ropes. This year's final round judges are Mary Podal, the state conservationist with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, Aaron Carranza, Director of Regulatory Division with the State Water Commission, Abigail Franklin, a hydrologist manager with the State Water Commission, Sam Swanberry, a hydrologist with the State Water Commission, and Braden Rambo, a hydrologist with the State Water Commission. Before we have our teams present, let me give the audience a brief background on this year's scenario related to water resources management. This year, teams had to act as hydrologists for the state of North Dakota, and they are pretending to manage the Central Dakota Aquifer. Their job was to recommend to the state engineer, who gets a permit to use water based on the available water resource data and the water appropriation statutes in the North Dakota Century Code. Another aspect of their job as a hydrologist is to communicate to the general public, which are our judges tonight, the recommendations they've made to the state engineer. Teams looked at the needs of water for irrigation, recreation, livestock, and domestic uses.
How do I find it now? Look at how big it is. I don't want to show the screen. I know, but it's
Sorry, 1 minute. I'm just gonna mute everybody. Okay. So teams tonight need to explain their decisions and rationale to the public who may be affected by their recommendations. Tonight's first presentation will be by team number 2. This is in no particular order and is based on the top 3 teams were chosen based on the preliminary round oral presentations and their 4 trail test scores. So I'm going to quick move teams 3 and 1 out of the room.
see it.
Okay, so Carol Peterson and team 1 will go into a room, and team 3 and Beth Hill will go into a room. Please make sure you go in there and stay in there till we ask you to come back. Okay, great. Okay, now I am going to make team number 2 I will spotlight that for everyone. And so everybody, I make sure everybody else is muted.
I'm sorry, is that upside? Is it backwards to you guys?
Oh, it looks good. One second, Valerie, or team two, you got muted. Just a second. Team two, don't start presenting. Please unmute yourself. Thank you. Okay. Do a quick test so we can make sure we can hear you.
Test.
Okay, we're good to go. You guys have 10 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Gabe Hansen, and I'm part of a team of hydrologists, and we'd like to talk to you about the Central Dakota Aquifer Water Management Plan for 2021. North Dakota. Okay, North Dakota is expected to have a severe drought this year, similarly to 2006, as shown by the information given by the State Water Commission. The water of the Central Dakota area is fulfilled by the Central Dakota Aquifer, which supplies water for domestic, public, livestock, and irrigation sites. With the drought this year, we'll have to adjust the century code that the aquifer is currently managed under, giving priority to those who need the water most. We'll also have to change how we accept and distribute water permits. Next up, Maren Trainer will talk to us about our plan of action.
Our recommendations to combat possible long-term effects of the drought include: first, we will amend current rules to change who has priority of obtaining water permits and usage. This way, irrigation and livestock will be at the top to support local farmers and ranchers over recreational use. And those who have had long-term permits will have priority for water usage. New permits will be reviewed under how much water is needed and what it is needed for. If the water usage from the aquifer reaches beyond the approved amount, additional restrictions may be placed. Through proven use of conservation practices, people can have the opportunity to be moved up on the priority list of water permits and usage. People in need of water because of the drought will be encouraged to apply for a temporary water permit, and water usage will be monitored continuously to be sure the aquifer is not extensively depleted. Up next, we have Teresa Horning, who will be talking about amendments of the water.
Our changes will only take effect and activate when there is an extreme drought as declared by the governor. We are going to amend 610406.1, which currently prioritizes domestic users and then ranchers, then farmers, and then recreational use of water. And we're going to change that so that when it is a drought season and when there's an extreme drought, the farmers and ranchers will have the highest priority, and then domestic users, and then recreational users of water. We are also going to amend 610406.3, which currently gives priority based on the date you have your permit and is issued to you. And we're going to change that so that in drought season, you have an increased priority if you're a farmer or rancher and you've had your permit for a long time, as to opposed to a farmer or rancher who hasn't had their permit for quite as long. We are also going to add a new rule, 610406.4, which will allow people to be able to increase their priority based on implementing conservation practices and providing proof of those conservation practices, such as water data or pictures of those practices in action. Next up is Lucas Wetzel to talk about some conservation practices you could use.
As Teresa said, I will be going over some of our recommendations for conservational practices. Our first recommendation is sprinkling / watering restrictions, sorry. And to start, we want to start with no restrictions. And then if we reach the total usage or more usage of 32,000 acre feet, then more strict restrictions will be put on sprinkling and water usage. And Gabe will explain this in more detail on our next slide. Our second recommendation is irrigation scheduling. We recommend that farmers and ranchers should try to irrigate before the sun comes up, because this will allow the water to sink into the soil, so that less water will be evaporated by the sun, giving the roots as much time to absorb as much water as they can. Also, checking the forecast before farmers and ranchers irrigate so that they do not irrigate when it's supposed to rain. And farmers and ranchers can use soil moisture probes in order to see if they actually need to irrigate right now or if they don't need to. And all of these will lead to a more effective water use and irrigation. Our third recommendation is conservational tillage. And the best case scenario would be no till, but we realize that this is unpractical. So we would just recommend conservational tillage, which is pretty much the next best thing. And these will have nearly the same benefits, but conservational tillage will not be to the same extent as no-till would be. And finally, as we've mentioned before, people who can provide proof that they have used these conservational methods, such as water data, pictures, or videos, will be given a higher priority in future water permits. Next, I will have Gabe come back to explain how we will be monitoring water usage throughout the year.
So all of the water used during the drought will come from the Central Dakota aquifer. And there are 47,000 acre feet approved to be taken out and distributed across 32,000 acres of irrigated land. If we compare this to 2006, when the most recent severe drought was, we can see that 25,000 acre feet were used across 25,000 acres. Now, if we compare this to current year 2021, this means that we will be able to allow water usage with low to medium restrictions until we use 32,000 acre feet, in which heavier restrictions will be put into place and water may need to be diverted away from recreational and public areas to farmers and ranchers who need it. Water usage will be monitored throughout the year, and moisture levels in the soil will also be measured using the soil moisture index. And aquifer levels will also be measured using pre-existing wells so that we make sure that the aquifer doesn't get too low and can be replenished. Next up, Ashley Getzfried will talk about possible grants and cost share options.
I will now discuss the possible grant and cost share options within the Central Dakota Aquifer area. The first option is the Drought Disaster Livestock Water Supply Assistance Program, and this program offers 50% cost share or a max of $4,500 per project for up to 3 projects, and this will allow for the development of livestock ranchers within the county. Another option is through the State Water Commission. They offer 50% cost share for irrigation within the Kidder and Stutsman counties. And then federally subsidized loans are another option. And these are a lengthy process, but options like the Water Smart loan grant through the Bureau of Reclamation allows up to $75,000 per year for water and land development steps. And then they help with the plan and implementation of that plan. And the next option is the Community Development Block Grant. And this is more like a loan, and it helps develop programs without and with water. And then the final option is the chief engineer is authorized to approve up to $75,000 of emergency funds. And these funds are used to help farmers and such during harsh conditions like droughts. Overall, these solutions are to be implemented during times of drought. These changes in priorities and amendments of rules and regulations will be set into place to increase stricter permit criteria. This will allow for the increase of conservation practices as well as grants and cost share to implement these practices. And finally, we realize these solutions are subject to change as conditions differ, and these are mere suggestions. Thank you for coming to our public information meeting.
Okay, thank you, Team 2. Now we will have judges ask questions for up to 8 minutes.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mary. I'm the state conservationist, so I was really proud to hear conservation practices. And so you're trying to convince me for irrigation and farm practices. So you're not going to have much of a problem with that. But what if my constituents that you're trying in the legislature represent Grand Forks and Fargo or Bismarck, where their voters are more recreational minded, more thinking about their lawns and their own flowers and gardens? What's an argument that you might make to convince them to vote to make this change in the legislature?
One thing you could think about is like this is some people's livelihoods and how they need this. They need this money to pay for their meals and to get water to their house and stuff like that. And another thing is the actual people who are going to be voting or the citizens are also going to need food, which these farmers and ranchers will be providing for them.
Thank you. And I've got two more questions and then I'll turn it over to the next, the judge. So as a conservationist, I understood someone to say no restrictions or like the first phase of the law would say no restrictions on water use. I could have misunderstood that. I see some shaking heads. Why not? Why not start right there with good use, sustained use to begin with?
Well, we were thinking about that, and like we said, all of this is susceptible to change. So as we were thinking about either doing no restrictions or light restrictions, but we'd probably go onto the side of light restrictions. Like you were saying, just be conservative with your water, be smart, don't be watering your lawn every day of the week. And then as we increase the water usage, we may need to implement heavier or more strict restrictions.
Thank you. And my last question is, in 2006, you are looking at comparisons of 2006 and 25,000 acre feet. Have you considered that we have different crops now compared to then, and they might, I don't know. Did you look at any of that to see if they might be more using water, such as corn and soybeans, compared to back then where the rotation might have been more wheat? Did you take that into consideration on your recommendations? And why not, or why?
I believe we did because I believe that the potato plant or the French fry plant that's there has been there since before 2006. So the main thing farmers plant there is potatoes, and it's been there for a while. And we know based off of that, we were able to calculate that it would be around the same. That's why it's just a comparison. It's not going to be exact. So that's why we gave ourselves that little because there's a 47,000 that's we're allowed to use. That's why we're putting restrictions on at 32,000, because that'd be kind of the benchmark where we're like, okay, we're using more than we did in our previous drought. So why is that? So we should put more restrictions on to help us save water.
Good reasoning skills. Thank you. I'll turn it over to the next judge.
I can ask a couple of questions. So you had mentioned changing priority and then approving more permits. What happens if you give a new irrigator a permit and he installs his well, puts in his pivot, and then doesn't employ any conservation practices? Would you shut him down? And do you feel like that should be policed?
I feel like with that situation, we have to definitely look into it. Like we have to watch their permit and make sure there's more strict restrictions on it. But I feel like it would depend on how many times we talk to them and warn them. But after a while, I feel like we would have to end up ending their permit, because in the beginning they would promise, or not promise, but we would kind of both agree that conservation practices would be implemented. And again, if they would just decide to not do that, we would have to look back at their permit and decide if they are still a good fit compared to other applicator or applications.
Okay. Okay. And then the other question is, just to clarify, I guess, so this, let's say there's a drought and then the next year it appears that there isn't. Does everything revert back to prior priority?
Yes, it will. And our amendments or changes will only take effect if there's a drought that the governor declares, kind of like he did this year. You know, where he declared an extreme drought and there's a fire and a burn ban.
So would you take permits away then from ones that you had granted during the drought when there's no longer a drought? Would you, just the question, just because, you know, for a farmer to install a well in a pivot, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Would you take it away once the drought is over?
I feel like when we go to give permits out during droughts, we would try to make most of them temporary permits to make sure that both us and the applicant know that this is could be a temporary thing or 1 year thing. And we'll give them those guidelines so that they know what they're getting into when they apply for it. And then later, after we decide if we do have to take their permit away, it'll be more like we've told you in the past that this could be an option so that none of us end up at the short end of the stick.
All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Judges, we have 2 minutes left for questions.
I have one for you. I want to make sure I understood you right. So you're giving the highest priority to irrigation?
Yes, irrigation as well as like ranching, because of how those jobs are the people's livelihood, and that does affects the amount of water they're given or the amount of water they can access. Directly affects their livelihood, and it's more than affects them more than how other people would be.
You understand under that scenario, you would allow irrigation to draw down water enough that it could impact domestic and municipal wells?
Yes, we did take like that's definitely a problem that would have to be decided by amendments, and that's part of the aquifer. How that's being monitored is through existing wells, so we'd have to make sure that that didn't end up impacting them as much.
And then can I add on to something she said? And then we'd also, as we said before, these rules are subject to change. So if we notice that certain things are not going well, we can go back and change these rules in order to fit like the scenario or the new scenario that we were given.
That it, judges? That is our 8 minutes. So thank you so much. Once again, this was team number 2 presenting. So team number 2, you can go rest and relax. I will bring
Thank you.
Thank you.
team number 3 here in a moment.
Okay, so number 3.
Okay. One second, guys. Thank you for your patience here. Okay, we will just go like this. Okay. Hi, team number 2, 3, you can get ready. I'm going to put team number 1 and Carol back into a breakout room.
This is clicking.
Try it.
It's weird.
What?
Look at the words.
No, it's okay on
For sure. Is it? You want to ask them?
Team
if it's
number
weird?
3, wait 1 minute.
We're just testing our clicker.
Perfect.
there. Is it mirrored?
Are the words mirrored for you guys?
Nope, looks good.
No.
Okay.
Okay. Almost ready to start. 1 second. Okay. Okay, team number 3, you may begin. You have 10 minutes.
Hello, we are team number 3. This is our water resources management current issue presentation for the year 2021. We are a group of hydrologists. My name is Makai. I'm kind of the chief hydrologist for our group, and we have been presented with the task of sort of dealing with some of the issues that are presented for water management in the year 2021. At the core of our plan is water, and that's kind of at the core of agriculture. So that's what we want to really focus on. This year is projected to be a drought year, so there's a number of issues that come with that. So we've kind of come up with a 3-step plan to deal with that. This picture here is a graph of North Dakota. The red area indicated is an aquifer, the Central Dakota aquifer, and it's what we're really going to be focusing on. It's in the Kidder and Stutsman counties. The first step of our plan is a reduced water usage for some users. Some permit holders are going to have a restricted use of water. That just kind of comes with the permit, with the drought year. But we're going to be honoring the prior appropriation of the law, and we're sort of going to be working with that. That'll be explained a little bit later. We want to have an adaptive monitoring system. This is almost going to be based off of kind of COVID plans where we have live updates almost weekly, maybe every other week, that kind of come up with steps and the actions that we'll be taking in the future or in the nearest future to deal with the drought. And the third step is water conservation practices. These are practical ways that farmers or other individuals can deal with having less water at maximum water that they have. I want to pass it off to Mac now, and you can talk a little bit more about the specifics of the problem we're dealing with this year.
Hi, my name is Mac, and I'm going to talk to you a little more about aquifers and our particular aquifer in question, which is the Central Dakota aquifer. So large reservoirs of groundwater are known as aquifers, and here in North Dakota, we have both confined and unconfined aquifers. The surface of our unconfined aquifers is known as the water table, and because this is at atmospheric pressure, the levels in our unconfined aquifer decrease when it is dry and are recharged during rainfall. Our levels in our unconfined aquifer will also mirror the levels in our confined aquifer, such as the Central Dakota aquifer. So our Central Dakota aquifer is primarily used for irrigation, and you can see that right here in this diagram. The difference is actually quite drastic. Sometimes our aquifers are threatened, and one such incident was the 2006 drought, which kind of sets a precedent for how we're going to handle future droughts, such as this year. So a drought is accompanied by a lack of rain and increased evapotranspiration. So in a normal year, as you can see in this hydrograph over here, our levels in our aquifer decrease during periods of heavy use and then increase when there is rainfall and they are recharged. So what happens with the drought is because of that increased demand, by farmers, because it is a drought year, as well as our increased evapotranspiration and a lot less recharge, it's not getting recharged by rain, our levels in our aquifer can decline below their normal levels. And what happened in 2006 is this happened so drastically with the Central Dakota aquifer that domestic wells at Lake Isabel were impacted. So there are over 100 cabins on that lake, and many of them are occupied by politicians and lawyers and other influential people. So one of the core principles of our management plan is to make sure that we are keeping the lake at levels high enough for those people around the lake, as well as keeping the aquifer at high enough levels so that their domestic wells are not impacted. Next, I'm going to hand it off to Mike, who's going to talk more about this year's current drought situation.
Okay, so the drought this year is expected to be a D3 category, which is the second highest drought. And it's going to accompany a D3 drought is major crop loss, as well as
very little water available for irrigation. And this year, approximately 47,000 acre feet of water have been approved for withdrawn from the Central Dakota aquifer, and it has been deemed that that amount is a sustainable amount to withdraw. However, it does not account for any of the drought situation, which is going to lead to a higher demand of water. Along with that 47,000 acre feet, there's an additional 1,100 acre feet of water that is waiting to be approved to be withdrawn from other farmers that need, are requesting more irrigation. Okay, so here's a chart and a graph that demonstrates the use of water withdrawn in past years from the Central Dakota aquifer. In the drought year of 2006, about approximately 25,000 acre feet of water were withdrawn. And in an average year, about 20,000 acre feet are drawn. So it's a little bit more. As you can see here, this is 2006 compared to, like, here's 2019. This is a year where there's a lot of rainfall, so very little water was required to be withdrawn. And as you can see, 25,000 acre feet is way below the 47,000 that's been approved. However, one of the major concerns is that by removing some of that water, it will lower the water levels within domestic wells and make that water level to the point where it's inaccessible for use. And another issue is that we're worried about the water lowering in the lake itself. Okay, I'm going to hand it off now to Jake, who's going to talk about the laws concerning water appropriation.
All right, so my name is Jake, and I'm going to talk about some of the appropriation statutes and rules that come along that we have to take into account when we're coming up with our recommendation. So first is the prior appropriation doctrine, which states that rights are determined by the priority of beneficial use. And next we looked at the priority in time doctrine, which states that superior rights are given to the first permit owners over the newer permit owners. And lastly, we're going to recommend that permits are continued to be accepted in the order of approval by state engineer, starting with domestic and then moving on to municipal, livestock. And then third and fourth are irrigation and industrial, which are our primary consumers in the area, which we'll be focusing on the most. And followed lastly by fish, wildlife, and recreational permits. I am now going to pass it on to Brooke, who is going to talk more about our recommendations.
My name is Brooke, and I'll be talking about the recommendations and reasonings for our current issue. There are approximately 200 water permit holders on this reservoir. In order to follow the water appropriation doctrine, we want to restrict the newest 50% of permit holders who utilize water for irrigation and livestock. For industrial permits, we suggest a revision of the Entry Code, specifically section 61-4-6.3, that states priority in time is a superior water right. We want to modify this so that industrial permits are secluded from restrictions applied to these water users. The reasoning we want to do this is that industrial permits are such a small fraction of the overall water use compared to irrigation, as well as that industrial permits are less fluid, so they can't do as much water conservation practices as farming can do, such as no-till farming. And it's a lot harder for those parts to bounce back. We also want to mitigate domestic impact by using proactive measures rather than reactive measures. Two of our examples include monitoring aquifer levels and having these restrictions at the beginning of the droughts. Moving on, kind of going off of the last slide, we want to create a lesser impact on domestic water users. One way we can do this is to monitor aquifer levels more often than in normal years. The reasoning behind this is because we want to be able to update those permit restrictions and make adjustments as adjusted. We also want to create an implementation of water conservation to minimize losses. One of these examples we can implement is agrotech. One of our examples is VRI, also known as variable rate irrigation. This helps regulate water usage within a certain area of land. And our second is soil moisture probes. A simple conservation practice that we can implement is watering crops at appropriate times. We suggest from doing research that we want to water at dawn, as during dusk, it promotes fungi growth, and during the day, the water can evaporate from the soils. Our practical solution would be to minimize tillage to promote non-compacted soil and porosity. I will now hand it over to Makai for conclusions.
Hi, it's Makai again. Just to sort of wrap things up and kind of conclude what we were talking about, part of our goal is to make sure that there is much water in the area and that we can sustain sort of the environment and other resources in that region over time so that we don't have irreparable damage to the aquifer or the water table. We want to have this progressive plan that involves adapting to the situation and presenting solutions that are reflective of real-time problems. So that comes in with that adaptive monitoring and almost the COVID-like response where we say bi-weekly we will respond. And then of course the water conservation as well as the reduced restriction of water are there to help maximize the water in the area. That kind of concludes our presentation. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we would like to open it up for questions.
Okay, thank you, team 3. Judges, you now ask questions for 8 minutes.
You said you wanted to restrict livestock well use. How would you go about that if you don't have contact information for the last 50% of stock well users?
Using the State Water Commission website, we were able to find which permits were active, and we could also find like the owners of those permits and like what the permits were used for. So I'm assuming that we would use some sort of system like that to find who has that permit and what they're using it for.
Okay, so irrigation permits or irrigation use typically is permitted, but a lot of livestock wells do not have water permits. So that would be a tricky part. The part about restricting irrigation use is something we do. So that was a good answer. The livestock would be a little harder, but.
And we were less concerned about the livestock. We wanted to include it just to make sure that it was something we accounted for, but we are mainly focused on the irrigation because that irrigation is taking up most of the water consumption in the area.
Right.
I was going to say, we do know that the water uses that don't require permits are typically much smaller, you know, that 12.5 acre feet figure. So if the water use by the individual livestock permits is, well, not permits, but their users is so low anyway, then they're going to be of minimal concern compared to our users who use their water for irrigation. So.
Hi, all.
Oh,
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
All right, thank you. Great presentation, everybody. You really made things flow quite well, teaching me a little along the way and then with your argument. One thing I did not understand, could you explain adaptive monitoring to me? I believe that was either the second or third presenter.
So adaptive monitoring is, so we are going to monitor the aquifer levels more often and based off of the levels of the aquifer and the water table and the lakes of the level of Lake Isabel. That is how we're going to come up with our solutions to the problem. Instead of trying to solve a problem that isn't necessarily there yet, we are going to focus mainly on what the issue is at that moment.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to the next judge.
Do you have any kind of what the step would be if the drought continues to get worse, and even though you're monitoring groundwater levels, the irrigators are still pumping and water levels still decline even far in the fall when they're not pumping anymore? What happens when water levels just keep declining or they don't, really bounce back? What happens if with all your monitoring it still doesn't do any good?
Well, I assume that we'll have to implement further restrictions. Perhaps maybe instead of the first 50% of permit holders, we will have to expand that to the first maybe 75%. Obviously, it's not, we want to make sure we're restricting minimally, but we also want to make sure that we're maintaining the level of that water table. And another thing about like fall and such is that most cabins on Lake Isabel are summer based. So the levels of the lake are of lesser concern, and level drawing from domestic wells are of lesser concern in the fall than they are in the summer. So once again, we would look at our data, we would look at all of our monitoring and use, and we would maybe even poll the public and see, you know, how much of a priority is it then in the fall if the drought continues, that water table remain high for the domestic use, but obviously still high enough so that it is sustainable. That would be our goal.
And another thing with that is when we have to push further restrictions on water usage, that's also when we would kind of adapt our plan and start advocating even more for water conservation techniques that include like increasing your soil porosity so that it can absorb more water when there is precipitation, or even those agrotech solutions that can help kind of maximize the water that you do have access for. That's when we would really start pushing for people to be using those when they have access to less water.
Thank you.
We have 2 more minutes. We can ask questions.
Well, I guess I can ask another one. Since you were talking about monitoring the State Water Commission, using the State Water Commission's wells, do you think there are enough wells there to monitor? Do you think that more wells should be put in? And if so, where? Do you think that there's enough data out there already? Or do you think that more needs to be collected?
Well, I mean, like part of our plan was to increase the amount of data that we are collecting. So instead of just using the wells that are available through the Water Commission, we could also use wells that are attached through the farmers' wells. So there's like I believe there's 200 wells that are into the Central Dakota aquifer. We can implement monitoring through those wells.
Kind of going off of what Micah said, I guess, is that we can have the ability of like real-time testing, and so that will help increase our research, I guess. And so it's always beneficial, I guess, to have more wells, but yeah.
No, the idea of real-time testing is a great idea, because otherwise, by the time you get the data back to the office, it might be getting too late. So that's a great idea.
We have time for a last question. We have 30 seconds. Or are we done? Okay, I think we are done. Thank you, team 3. Give me a few seconds to bring back team number 1.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Let's see. Team number 1, are you guys back? Carol, are you back?
Yes, I am back, so they should be back any second.
Okay.
Yeah, we're here.
Yep, there you go.
My picture back.
Okay, I'm gonna, there we go. Okay, team number 1, you are now spotlighted. Are you guys ready to do a test, please, so I can hear you?
Test.
Hi.
Test.
Testing.
Okay. You guys have 10 minutes to present. Go.
Okay. Thank you all for tuning in to tonight's presentation. Where the Hydro has been assigned to help Lake Isabel this year, problem similar to 2006. I am Casey, is also Casey, Aaron, Kennedy, and William, and we are Team 2. And this is a plan that we will be submitting to the state engineers. Here is our overview. First, we will be explaining what is an aquifer, and then what water permits require, then our permit plan, the effects of domestic water use, alternative water sustaining practices, our plan for Lake Isabel and the refuge, and finally, sustaining lakes and aquifers into the future for generations to come. And now I will be handing the floor over to Aaron.
First things first, we should go over what an aquifer is. Putting it simply, think of an aquifer as a big porous sponge. Towards the surface, we have the upper aquifers, which is an unconfined water source. Then in the middle, we have the glacial outwash, which holds water. And then all the way at the bottom, we have the deep aquifers, which are confined water sources. Irrigation water is pumped from the deep aquifers. Every winter, precipitation recharges the aquifer so that it can be pumped for the next year. This year is much similar to 2006 in that the aquifer saw very little recharge during the winter and is projected to only get lower during the summer as pumping for irrigation increases. With this information about how the aquifer works, combined with the laws for water appropriation, we as hydrologists can help advise the state engineer to approve or deny a water permit. And I will now hand the floor over to Casey, who will explain the laws for water appropriation.
Keeping the aquifer in mind, we have the law NDCC 61-04-02, requiring that all water uses except domestic livestock, fish, wildlife uses must apply for a water permit before putting water to beneficial use, unless the use is greater than 12.5 acre-feet per year. With that being said, as a hydrologist, we have recently been asked to assess a proposal for the additional use of 1,100 acres of groundwater for irrigation. We've proposed to the state engineer the denial of a permit for the additional use of water. We've already given permits for the use of 32,000 acres for irrigation with an additional 47,000 acres of groundwater. With our current situation of drought, the last permit would be limited due to the current limitations on water resources. These priorities over irrigation would therefore be given to domestic use, municipal or public use, livestock use followed by the use for irrigation. These new proposals on irrigation would then be cut due to domestic use priorities, which will be introduced to you by Kennedy.
As hydrologists, it is our job to uphold the priorities and effects of Lake Isabel in the Central Dakota Aquifer. Statute 610406.1, the preference in granting permits, says that domestic use of water has the #1 priority when it comes to water rights. With that in consideration, this summer is predicted to be an extra special dry one, as Casey mentioned, so we will be cutting back on unnecessary water use and we will not be granting that new permit. You can't draw faster than you can restore the water resources, because ultimately water restoration, slowed by expected high evapotranspiration, is a snowball effect. The further behind we get, the longer it will take to rejuvenate our water supply, the Central Dakota Aquifer. Our goal is to work together to sustain the Central Dakota Aquifer and Lake Isabel and prevent a repetition of 2006, when heightened irrigation and pumping of groundwater impacted the domestic wells, which are our priority to protect. Efficient water use is vital to protecting Isabel's future. There are 100 lake cabins around Lake Isabel, and they too are responsible for maintaining water efficiency during a drought. We advise cabin residents to place roofs over structures, over wells to prevent water waste through evaporation. We also advise the implementation of rain barrels for gardening and lawn use. In cases of excessive water use, we advise the state engineered to enact the statute 610406.2. This subjects the permitted party to fees to protect public interest. This statute would prevent using excessive water for things such as watering vegetation and other excessive use of water. To propose our in-depth plan for the future of Lake Isabel and the Central Dakota Aquifer, I'll hand you over to William.
To help further secure the future for Lake Isabel and for the Slade National Wildlife Refuge, we as the team of hydrologists advise that the state engineer issue a conditional permit to Lake Isabel and to the Slade National Wildlife Refuge. And what this would do is basically it would set a lake water minimum that has to be in the lake at all times. Because back in 2006, the water level actually went so low that the lake was closed off to recreational purposes, and it affected the domestic wells because it went too low. And the lake water was so low that it hurt the environment around it as well. So previously, the Lake Isabel and the Wildlife Refuge did not have their own water rights. So issuing them this permit would secure them at least some water and have a right over some of the water in the lake as well. The actual amount of water that would be set as the minimum is something that will be determined with later inspection, more in-depth inspection after this meeting. But this would help make a buffer for the environment and to help better protect our priorities. Because what this would also do is set a buffer between the domestic wells and the irrigation for the farming. Because our number one priority is the domestic wells and all of their uses. So in doing this, this would help further put that gap between them so that there wouldn't be an effect on the domestic wells like we saw in 2006. And this would help just secure the environment and all the recreational uses and all the domestic uses that we need for this lake. In conclusion, our job as the team of hydrologists is to secure the lake and the refuge and all of its uses from now and into the future. So that would be obviously our first priority being domestic use and then livestock and then the recreational and irrigation and all the other uses that it is used for. But if we don't have the lake now, we will not have it in the future. So we need to encourage more efficient use of water, and especially in this situation, which is not giving out the new permits in a drought situation, and just regulating the lake water and giving a buffer and a minimum to the lake so that we can maintain a healthy and prosperous lake now and into the future and have a sustainable use of the water for agricultural needs. And then we would also like to put out a thank you for putting this allowing this meeting to happen at all. I know over the past year, it's been pretty crazy and there's been a lot going on. And even over at a virtual format and all the work that was put into this meeting, we're very grateful that we were able to present our plan to the public. And it's an opportunity that we would not take for granted. And we're very grateful for it. Thank you for coming to the meeting today.
Great. Thank you, Team One.
I hope you're okay.
Okay.
Thank you. My name is Mary. I work for the Conservation Service, and so my customers are agriculture customers and irrigators, and I like to eat. I like to eat those potatoes that get irrigated in order to grow. And I'm a little concerned here that your priority is going to totally wipe out the farming around Lake Isabel. What is your argument, or what do you propose? Because this is not going to be, I admire your stance. It is the law and it is your priorities, absolutely. But what do you say to those farmers that are looking at their livelihood and might have to quit farming?
So we're not going to be cutting off all water permits for future water permits that were already given to farmers. We're just kind of restricting any future ones for this year. And with the permits, it's like a last come first to lose your rights. So the people who have had their water rights for like years, they're going to be the last ones to get the resources taken away. But like we said, the domestic use is the #1 priority for us to protect. So.
And if the aquifer were to be better replenished into the future, that is something we would consider is at giving out more permits. It's just that this year we don't. It's already it's looking like it's going to be a 2006 level drought, and it's not something we want to repeat.
Thank you.
Why is the domestic use your #1 priority?
So the domestic use wells are used for livestock and for home and for like certain municipalities and towns, and it's water used for like the necessities in life. So if these houses and these towns and these animals do not have their water, obviously that it's a necessity. So it does take priority over the rest because and it is something that we are upholding because it is stated in the law. So we as hydrologists, we are here to interpret the lake, but we are also here to follow the laws. So it is something that we do have to factor in.
So if there's an irrigation permit that has a priority date that's older than a domestic well, you would still give priority to the domestic well?
Yes.
Okay.
It's still based off like when the permits. So, like I said, the last people to get their permits issued are the first people to get their rights taken away. So say that like a domestic well was issued after a farm, the domestic well would therefore get their like rights at least reduced before the farm would get theirs taken away.
Okay.
So in order to give a permit to Lake Isabel, first of all, they would have to apply for a permit, but then that would make that application junior to the pending irrigation applications. How would you explain not giving that water to the senior irrigation applications and giving it to a junior application for the lake?
I'm sorry, could you explain what you mean by junior application for the lake? Do you just mean it was submitted?
Mm-hmm. It was so if it would mean that the application was submitted later. So that's how priority dates work, is basically when the application was submitted. That's where that's all established at. And so you've got all these deferred irrigation applications out there already. And if the stakeholders, I guess, of Lake Isabel came in and applied for an application to have a permit there, that application would they'd be so young, I guess, compared to all these much older irrigation permit applications that are waiting to be approved. And normally you have to approve that stuff in order.
Yeah. Are you referring to what William said, Lake Isabel, like the rights over their water? Or...
I guess just determining how would you choose, or how would you explain giving Lake Isabel a permit and not the irrigators that are waiting for permits, even though they've been waiting much longer?
So it is something that we have, that is in a law that we are following, because one of the priorities is the game and fish and the recreation. And then we have another law that would issue a fee that prohibits use of water against the beneficial use. And in this case, you issuing that 1,100 acre feet of water, permit would not be going to the beneficial use, and it would be affecting the senior stakeholder, like the senior permit holders, and it would be something that would be affecting everyone because we do have a limited supply So if they would be getting a slice of the pie, everyone else's would be getting smaller. So in doing this, this does secure one of our priorities, and it might cut into in the future, but this would help further secure our priorities with recreation and with the refuge and with, like adding those buffers there. That would be something that would go towards the beneficial use as according to the law.
Yeah, and on that, we've already given 32,000 acres for irrigation this year.
So you did mention
Scarcity is never like a desirable situation, but it is like our job to make these recommendations to the oh my gosh, state engineer. Yes. So the recommendations are difficult with scarcity, but these are what we found to be best.
We have 1 minute left, judges, for a question.
Thank you. So you did mention conservation practices for the cabin residents. Did you consider or would you consider conservation actions for other water users in the area?
Yes, we would advise that anyone who uses water from Lake Isabel try to conserve as much as possible.
And a big part of that might just be as simple as if it's raining, making sure you go turn off your sprinklers, or if fixing leaks.
Not using sprinklers.
Yeah, or just not using sprinklers, whatever that be. It's just being more conscious of where your water is going. And while like you're personally refilling the lake on your own, but every little bit counts. Yeah. So it's just generally not being like just watching where your water.
Okay, thank you so much, Team 1. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to now turn the meeting over to Beth Hill with the North Dakota Fun Trivia Contest. Okay, so since we couldn't see each other all this year together, I wanted to quick go through some photos I got from the teams. This is a photo of the MLS Mohall Mavericks Angels, the Dickinson Igneous Intrusion, MLS Mohall Danger Cats, Minot Bishop Ryan, and they were actually team number 1, the Knotweeds, that presented tonight, the last team to present. The Ned Rose Cardinals, I didn't get a picture yet, but Bismarck High Water Beetles were team 2, they presented first. And Bismarck High Water Buffaloes were team 3, they presented second. We weren't together and competition looked different. This is what competition looked like this year. Students were working together in their classrooms, around their laptops, but they still were collaborating, and I think they still had some fun. Okay, and now I am going to turn it over to Fred Aziz, our North Dakota Envirothon Committee chair member, to present the awards.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Yep, I can hear you, Fred.
Okay. Before I go ahead and announce the awards, I would like to say on behalf of the North Dakota Envirothon Committee, I'm really thankful to Andrea for all you have done this year. I know it's been a trying year, and this year being your first year as our coordinator, you've done a marvelous job, and I thank you for that on behalf of all of us on the Envirothon Committee. I'm looking forward, as you said, to get together and next year to get together at the camp and do this all together as a whole competition. Next, we're going to go to the awards. I'm proud to announce that the winner of the Soils Trail, congratulations goes to Bismarck High, the Water Buffaloes. I'd like to congratulate the winner of the Aquatics Trail, and that goes to Mohall Danger Cats. Congratulations. Congratulations go to the winner of the Prairie Forestry Trail, and that's the Bismarck High Water Buffaloes. Congratulations. I'd like to give the congratulations to the winner of the current issue. And the winner of the current issue goes to Bismarck High Water Buffaloes. Congratulations to you.
Fred, can you give the winner of the wildlife too, please?
The winner of the Wildlife Trail, it goes to Bismarck High Water Buffalo. Congratulations to you. So that's for the trails in the current issue. For the overall third place winner, I'd like to give congratulations to Bishop Ryan, the Knotweeds. Congratulations on your award. The second place overall award goes to Bismarck High Water Beetles. Congratulations to you on your accomplishment this year. And the overall final competition winner for the 2021 North Dakota Envirothon is the Bismarck High Water Buffaloes. Congratulations to you. You did a great job. All the teams did a great job. I'm proud of all of you. The overall winners will be given each team member for the Bismarck High Water Buffaloes will be given a $500 award to each team member. Well done, all teams. Thank you for participating this year. Really appreciate the hard work that you've done, and not only to the teams, but also to the advisors who helped them out throughout this time. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Andrea.
Thank you so much, Fred. And I want to once again congratulate Bismarck High Water Buffaloes on their win. And I want to wish them good luck at the national competition this year, which will be based out of Nebraska. It will, however, be virtual, but I feel like this competition, I hope anyways, has prepared you for another virtual competition. Again, I want to say thank you to all of our sponsors and volunteers, advisors, and team members for making this year a success. And I look forward to an in-person competition again next May. Thank you and good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.